Friends, fellow Singaporeans, thank you all for coming for this rally at this historic site. 4 years ago, I spoke at the SDP rally during GE2011, and I felt a sense of awe at the memories of Mr. David Marshall, Mr. Lim Chin Siong, and Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and all the great orators who had spoken near this venue. In that earlier speech, I spoke about the gaps in our healthcare system. One of my former students recorded the speech, and the speech went viral. Many people thought I would lose my job at the university. In fact, every time I went to Mount Elizabeth Hospital to visit a friend, someone would come up to me and say, "Oh, so they finally fired you." On the contrary, in fact, in 2013, 2 years after the speech, and 1 year after the SDP healthcare plan, I was promoted to full professor with tenure. Singapore has really changed. The knuckle duster era is well and truly over. And this election proves it. Just look at that. Roy Ng and Han Hui Hui are out there giving rally speeches, interviews to the media, something that is unthinkable a few years ago. I'd like to begin my speech proper by addressing some of the concerns raised by DPM Tharman about our alleged tax and spend policies. Now, I know this may not be popular with the Shenton Way crowd, but as Dr. Chi said on Saturday, we'd rather tell you the truth and lose the election than get in by trying to mislead you. So first of all, however, I'd like to commend DPM Tharman and some of his colleagues for contesting this election on the issues, rather than on the gutter politics of the past. I would also like to put on record my view that DPM Tharman is probably the most brilliant of our current ministers, and many of us think he would make a fine Prime Minister. In fact, to tell you a secret, there are many of us in the alternative parties who hope that one day DPM Tharman will have a falling out with the Prime Minister and will come out to lead a grand coalition of opposition parties, Pakatan Rakyat Singapura, to present a real alternative to the current PAP government. Having said all that though, I'd like to take issue with a number of points that he made in his widely circulated rally speech. First of all, as mentioned yesterday, the SDP healthcare plan is not about free healthcare, but a national healthcare plan that provides basic healthcare. As in other countries which are high performing, if you are rich and you want Orchard Road kind of services, you can always pay for it. But the middle class will not feel the need to do so with our comprehensive health insurance plan. Secondly, it was good of Minister Tharman to acknowledge that the government has shifted its policies to the left around the time of the 2006 general election, when they suffered a significant drop in the popular vote. We all know that this process accelerated in 2011 when there were 7 WP MPs in Parliament. In fact, thanks to a parliamentary question by Mr. Gerald Giam, we now know that MediShield is probably the world's most profitable public healthcare insurance policy in terms of its medical loss ratio. We need many more opposition MPs in Parliament to sieve through the complexities of Singapore's healthcare system to ensure that Singaporeans have true peace of mind. Now, Singapore has very good doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals. We have very good facilities. We have access to some of the best drugs in the world. But unfortunately, all this is very expensive. The proposed solution, MediShield Life, while a step forward by including those with pre-existing conditions, has got way too many holes in it to provide genuine relief for Singaporeans. For MediShield Life, the deductible is very high. You have to pay the first $1,500 to $3,000 depending on which class of hospital you stay in. You either pay that in cash or you pay through MediSave. Most elderly Singaporeans have no MediSave, so they have to depend on their children's MediSave, which puts an additional burden on the next generation. For those without children, it's even worse. They have to turn to the neighborhood along. And this is really, really unfortunate because Credit Counselling Singapore has data which shows that medical expenses are among the top 5 reasons for bankruptcy in Singapore. This is unacceptable in modern Singapore. Furthermore, the premiums for MediShield Life increase with age and subsidies expire in a few years. That means yet again the children and grandchildren will have to pay the premiums for senior citizens. This puts a significant burden on the next generation, which is already squeezed by high childcare costs and children's education costs on one hand, and then the cost of looking after their parents on the other. This kind of generational cost shifting by the PAP puts a huge burden on citizens which is simply not sustainable. Thirdly, DPM Tharman questioned our proposal to raise taxes on the top 1% of income earners to levels that they were in Singapore in the year 2000. He said the top 1% were mobile and could move out of Singapore if they wanted to. We disagree. In the past, the top 1% of income earners in Singapore were great philanthropists. The Lee Kong Chian, the Tan Kah Kee, Tan Chin Tuan, the Alsagoffs, the P. Govindasamy Pillays. They did not hold the government of the day hostage by saying that if Singapore raised the taxes, they would run away. No, on the contrary, they stayed, they paid their taxes, and they made significant contributions to Singapore in terms of building schools, hospitals, community services, and etc. That is the kind of top 1% we want. We don't want the Robert Mugabes, the billionaire playboys, the tax-evading Europeans and Australians, the Burmese drug lords. If those people are upset about the proposed luxury taxes or the higher taxes proposed by alternative parties and want to leave the country, then I say, let them go. I suspect that some of your bosses may lose a client or two, but that's too bad. Fourthly, he tried to argue that the Singapore system is a fairer system with a low-income tax regime. Now, as you all know, Singapore now has no estate duty and for a long time has had no capital gains tax. Who benefits from that? The wealthy. The poor, on the other hand, pay GST even on their water conservation tax. So they pay tax on tax. This is really not fair. This may be good for business and for some of you, but I don't really think it's fair. To be fair to DPM Tharman though, he has recognized the undesirability of this inequality, and he's taken steps to try and make Singapore's tax system more progressive. I just think that he needs more opposition voices in Parliament to push him even more towards a fairer and more just regime. Finally, he asked whether there was any country in the world which could provide free or nearly free universal health care without causing a real burden on the middle class. Now let me tell you something. There is a small city-state located at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula that was the subject of a visit by a team from the World Health Organization in August 1960. The Minister for Health at the time was Encik Ahmad Ibrahim, who has been largely forgotten except for a road going into Jurong. And the Director of Medical Services was a Dr. Marcus. Encik Ibrahim and Dr. Marcus described a vigorous and healthy metropolis lying at the crossroads of Asia. And I quote, they said, the medical services has now become predominantly, though not entirely, a responsibility of the government, with the mass of the population entitled to it without personal cost. The medical personnel are salaried employees of the government, and most of the hospital facilities are governmental. All of these are financed from general revenues. Private practice exists for a small upper income segment of the population, especially in the city area. That state, of course, was Singapore during the 1960s, when there was an active opposition in Parliament. And the PAP government had to deliver on its promises to put people above profits. The PAP then is different from the PAP now. We need to have more opposition independent voices in Parliament to remind them of their past, to remind them who put them there in the first place, the people of Singapore. Finally, I would like to move on to the topic of immigration. The SDP is not against immigration. We believe that carefully calibrated immigration can enrich the diversity of Singapore's commercial, cultural, and civic life. We do believe, however, that the infrastructure has to be in place first before you let in masses of population rather than the other way around. We are for quality immigration that protects the rights of the immigrants as much as it protects the local-born population. My own grandfather came to the Straits Settlements at the age of 17 in 1911 to become the principal of ACS in Penang. He went on to Singapore to further his studies. He got a PhD from the University of London for a thesis on bilingual education, published in 1939. During the Second World War, he was the pastor in charge of St. Andrew's Cathedral and kept the church going through the bombings and the violence. His children continued to serve Singapore in many diverse ways, although many of my cousins have migrated because of the economic and other problems here in Singapore. His youngest daughter is my mother, and she has been my inspiration in my fight for social justice. Her favorite verses from the Bible are from Proverbs 31. She often told us, "Speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. Speak out in order to judge with righteousness and to defend the needy and the poor." My mother was initially afraid of the consequences of my involvement in this campaign, but now she's become one of my most ardent supporters. She tells all her friends and neighbors to vote for the SDP. Now we are realistic. We are not going to form the next government. There are only 11 of us running in this election. Like the PAP and the other opposition candidates, we are not perfect. We are not saints. We in the SDP are just ordinary people with a heart for Singapore and Singaporeans. With our alternative policies, we have benchmarks. Benchmarks which we can use to help ensure social justice. We can be a check on the PAP government to remind them of when the PAP was responsive to the people of Singapore, when they had a strong opposition in Parliament. We can make them accountable to you, the people of Singapore. We can help increase transparency by asking good questions on the issues that matter to Singaporeans: the cost of living, of healthcare, of housing, of education, and the population. Vote for us on Friday. Put a cross by the rocket. Make us your voice in Parliament. Thank you.